Welcome to Tattoo Tabletop. My name is James, and today we are continuing the road to the Tampa Open. I am very excited to report that I attended an RTT this last weekend at the Forge, where I brought my Idoneth Deepkin out for a spin. And what you see in front of you is the list that I brought. I am also very happy to report that I ended up going 2-1. That's right, I did the best I've ever done at any Age of Sigmar RTT than I ever had before, which is fantastic. It really kind of brought a lot of my confidence up, especially considering that we opened up with a big loss. Yeah, let's go with it was crushing. One second. It hurt. But so in this episode today, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through the list, a little bit of what it does, and then we're going to go through the individual rounds. We won't go into too many details. We'll cover some that are very important, but overall I'll just give you a rundown of what all happened. So here's what we have for the list. At the top, our general, we have the Achillean King. He is our smash Achillean King. He is as strong as he possibly can be with the artifact Potion of Hateful Frenzy, which honestly I didn't really pop that often because his general trait was Unstoppable Fury, which is hands down the best command trait you can give him, which means it's actually +2 attacks for every melee weapon for each enemy within 3 inches, which means that this guy, if he finds the right charge spot, he is just shredding everything in his way. And he was fantastic. Definitely a top player for me. He also has the ability to roll up to D3 units and put them into the high tide, which is huge because it means I can jump to the high tide early, or I can jump into it after I've already lost the high tide. Made a huge difference. Smash King, big win. Next, I actually brought Volturnos. Volturnos is actually the other Achillean King, the named Achillean King. I mainly brought him because I thought he would be a good speed to bring to the army as well. I mean, they both move 14 inches. I don't have a spare Achillean King, and he also has his ability that allows him to pick 3 units and add an additional attack to their attack characteristic if they're wholly within 12 of him, and of course they're in the high tide. So for him it was actually kind of nice too, because when I was going into the high tide, I was sending everything in the kitchen sink into him. I was sending in the sharks, I was sending in my Achillean King, I was sending in Volturnos, I was sending in the turtle. I was sending in everybody so I could fight first, do all my damage, and hopefully kill whatever I touched. He just kind of gave him a little extra push to do some damage. Otherwise, for my battle line, I also had some Reavers. Namarti Reavers are a fantastic, honestly a fantastic unit. They have 2 attacks per, 3s and 3s, -1 damage at 18-inch range, which is pretty good shooting, and you can get +1 to hit if whatever you're shooting is wholly within 12, which in the case of my Leviathan was 15 because of his mount trait. But get the +1 to hit, so oftentimes they're shooting and they're hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s with that -1 damage, 20 shots. It'll get through some things, it'll definitely do some damage. They were also a fantastic choice. Reavers, also a good choice. Now onto a unit that I think is a little debatable, the Morsar Guard. I just picked up Eels for the first time not that long ago. I mean, I had 3 Ishilan Guard that I really didn't use very often in my Idoneth Deepkin list. These are my first real Eels. And I gotta say, they're kind of a mixed bag. In certain matchups, they're just not very useful. Good example that I'll kind of cover later is my second match against Seraphon, where I was fighting Coalesce, which was -1 damage. The whole point is that these guys charge and their profile goes up to -2 rend, 2 damage apiece, which for Coalesce goes down to 1, so it's not much. And at 2 attacks per, it's kind of rough. I never really unleashed their Biovoltaic Blast, which I know was like the main thing to do for them. They more or less were just an aggressive screen for me early. I just threw them out to just tackle something and to force the opponent to have to deal with them so that I could bring in the heavy hitters a little bit later. Also, actually, in my heroes, I also had a Tidecaster. Tidecaster is literally just there to give me 2 rituals, which are 2 additional benefits to my tides. I find that they're worth the points just to get those 2 alone, but I also put Horror Frost on that model, so that way I could, maybe pop off a spell that actually boosted the combat ability of one of my units, whether it be my Sharks, Reavers, maybe it's my King, or especially what I did is if I rolled high on Horror Frost, I gave my Leviathan, specifically its fins, -3 rend, which is huge, makes it really go through a lot faster, and really does some serious damage there. As you can see also here, this lovely red unpainted thing. I also brought Jaws. I brought Flaming Jaws. Alright, you know what it is. Ravnax, smashing, gnashing, tooth, gashing, blood, gnashing. You get it. I brought that just because, one, I had additional points that no unit was ever really going to be able to fulfill. And number two, mainly also because, you know, it can do damage. That being said, there was one of my final matches where I actually got the spell off, and I rolled 3 1s in a row. For those of you who don't know, basically I rolled 3d6 to get the measurement, and that's how far it moves, and I was running into some orcs, so I was actually running into slow units, and all I needed was a 2+ to do the difference in mortal wounds, and one. It was a lot of ones. It hurt. It was extremely painful. But overall, actually not too bad. I actually still ended up using it as a decent screening unit so that I could actually put it in front of some stuff, block some movement, keep it in place. So it did serve a decent purpose. It might still make the cut later. We'll find out. Last but not least, my Leviathan. Now, I didn't have this in an original list, and I added it after a practice game because of one simple reason. Its Void Drum ability also offers +1 to save for anything that is 8 wounds and under. Wholly Within 12, which for his mount trait was Wholly Within 15. And that applies to the Sharks, it applies to Volturnos, it applies to the Achillean King. I needed these additional saves. The King and Volturnos both have a 3-up, which is really, really good. But Sharks at a 4-up is really, really rough. That's what I learned from a lot of my practice games, is that they're 8 wounds and they can do some damage, but sometimes if they whiff, they are going away. Even against a -1 or even no rend, sometimes it's really difficult, especially because I was running them in Futan, which meant I was running them as a bloodthirsty shiver for the exploding attacks. They can't give themselves commands. So I had to keep them near King, near Volturnos. I needed to keep them near something that could actually give them the command, which I did as a part of my strategy anyway, but it was definitely a very crippling point. Otherwise, the turtle helped a ton. That puts all my Sharks on 3-ups, that puts Volturnos and my Achillean King on 2-ups. Really helps beef it up a little bit, make them last a little bit longer, which means I actually get to attack a bit more. So that was huge, made a huge difference. God, that's good. All right, on to the matches. Now, for my very first match, I was up against Gloomspite Gitz, and this was a very experienced player, which I'm happy to report every single one of my opponents was incredible. They were super nice, and I thought we had some really great games. Even this first one where I got destroyed. I got put into the earth, and then a little bit of dirt just like sprinkled, like Salt Bay sprinkled on my grave. This is like the first time I really felt where Idoneth are sitting at right now, primarily because of the fact that Idoneth do not have ward saves, and boy does it show. When Gloomspite Gitz have such incredible movement and they have such incredible mortal wound output, I felt it in my bones. Gloomspite Gitz, I think, is just a really bad matchup for Deepkin, primarily because even if I do catch them first, even if I do engage them in melee, which is what my army primarily wants to do, they have a lot of abilities that do mortal wounds as they fail braveries, as they run away, as they die. So even if I was killing the things that I was supposed to, basically they were just clapping mortal wounds right back at me. So it was very important for me to just be able to put that out and get some damage and try and kill them at range as much as possible, which my Leviathan and my Sharks helped with. But at the end of the day, it was still incredibly, incredibly rough. That being said, I lost that match and we went, I think I got 10 points. Yeah, it was rough, but hey, we live and we learn. This is all I'll learn. And again, my opponent was absolutely incredible and I thank him for it. Round number 2, we went on to the Seraphon Coalesced, which I alluded to earlier. In this case, they were running Thunder Lizard, which meant that we still got the -1 damage, but it also meant that they got 2 monstrous actions, and that can be brutal when you have 2 Stegodons, 1 Saurus Whole Blood on Carnosaur, and 1 Oracle on Troglodyte. I spaced for a second. Sorry. Refresh. Anyway, but it was a great match. There was a lot of back and forth. We were trading objectives left, right, and center. And what ended up really happening is we had a point where it looked really bad for me. Where I want to say around my turn 3, I had 7 points because I had failed battle tactics and I had barely gotten objectives, and he was at 14 points. But turn 3, that's my turn. That's high tide turn. And I was able to pounce and capitalize and get so much damage output from all my units that I was able to really start taking out a lot of his key units, and it really kind of helped change the game. And what also helped is around turn, I want to say 4, there was a moment where he had an opportunity to shoot my Reavers. He took it, he shot them, he killed a bunch of them. I kept the icon bearer, the one that would actually be able to give and receive commands itself. I left it there. I kept it back on the objective so that way I made his charge as hard as possible because I knew he was trying to charge in, and he failed the charge even with a reroll. Completely changed the game, especially for me because then after that I was able to put my units back into the high tide since I had saved the Italian King's ability. They all piled into the Oracle, they all piled into the Stegodon, and they tore it down, taking down his last major units, cleaning up the rest. At the end, it was something like 24 to 14 or something like that. I can't remember. You know what? Here, let me check. I stand corrected. I came back and it was 19 to 14, but again, great fight. At that point I was 1-1 and on to the last round. So last round we were off against the Auric Warclanes. In this case we were running against some Cruel Boys. Now Cruel Boys have actually been seeing some decent success in the new GHB, and it is relatively easy to see why. The poison and mortal wound output of the army is pretty good, and it's got decent affordable screens. Fortunately, in this case, there was a few things that went really well for me. We both kind of skirted away from each other because he had some shooting, and we both ironically couldn't shoot each other unless we were within 12 inches due to my Tidecaster pulling up the ritual that allowed me to not be visible within 12 inches. Made a huge difference. Kind of kept me from getting crossbowed because he had a little bit further range than I did, but it really kind of evened the playing field. And then all in one turn, it all had to go off. I sent everything in early on turn 2, and I managed to put all 3 of the units that I sent into the high tide. I had to sacrifice my Morsar Guard earlier in the turn to kind of really screen him and do some early damage to clear some stuff out, and it worked really well. I managed to pop off Ravnak's Nash. I don't know why I just did that. Anyway, I managed to pop that off, and I actually used it as a movement blocker to kind of keep his one flank in place while still possibly trying to do some more wounds, which of course I failed, as I indicated earlier. I rolled 3 1s in a row. It's fine. It didn't traumatize me or anything at all. No, I'm still completely fine. Anyway, so I sent those in. They did some damage, but what the Morsar Guard actually really did for me is they opened up the center. So I managed to clear enough of a space in his army in that center to be near his general, to get the rest of his units. I ended up within about 3 or 4 units that I was within 3, and I sent my king straight down the middle. I threw him right into the thick of it on the high tide, got my +2 attacks per unit in there. I took the bladed polearm and I just stabbed the ever-living sea out of his general, killed him, killed a bunch of other units. At the end of the day, this game was a massive game of attrition. I actually ended up winning by a good amount of points, but it didn't really reflect how the game actually was. There was a lot of nail-biting, sweaty moments of just worrying about, am I going to get priority again? Am I going to lose it? There was a lot of opportunities where if he had taken priority for the turn, it could have been a completely different game because we were both just absolutely demolishing each other's armies. But at the end of the day, I took home the win, which ended my day at 2 wins, 1 loss, which is, again, the best I've ever done at Age of Sigmar. It felt really good. It felt like I had been playing this game for a while, which I know I'm kind of getting back into, but I can feel myself actually kind of progressing, which feels really good. It's always a great feeling when you have that moment of progression where you feel like you've actually adapted, you've changed, you've learned, and you've grown from your previous experiences, whether, you know, it's a couple games or it's a ton of games, whatever. So, end of the day, I did the best I ever did, and I'm super proud of it. Now comes the hard part. By the time that this comes out, I'm going to be in the week of going to Tampa for the Tampa Open. Who and what am I bringing? I think I'm still going to bring the Deepkin. I know I talked about playing the Seraphon. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get in enough games with the Coalesced Seraphon, Coal's Claw, which is the one that I would want to run in order for myself to feel confident, and I want to be the best opponent I can be for my opponent. I want to be the best that I can be for them, so in that way I know my rules, we can talk. It's a lot better. You know, for anyone new out there, tip number one, if you are going to a tournament, which if you're going to an RTT, it's a little different. If you're going to play a friendly game, it's a little different. But if you're going to a tournament, a full-blown tournament, know your rules, especially when it comes to those high-stakes situations where the clock's running down and your ability to know your rules really dictates how the game actually turns out and how it actually goes. It's just better to know your rules. It's a huge thing. Things that I'm thinking right now. Number one, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep the eels, honestly. Or I might just bring them down to a 3-man unit. Right now I'm a 1-drop, which is huge. I think that gives me a lot of advantage. It helps me dictate whether or not I'm going first or my opponent's going first, which oftentimes I gave my opponent turn so that they can move up to get closer to me. But their damage output was very mediocre. It was very rough. The Seraphon match in particular, -1 damage, really hurt. Navrak smashing jaws, I mean, again, that's 80 points. I think I might actually switch that up to Horrorghast, which means that anything within, I want to say 3 can't do Inspiring Presence or Rally, which could be really huge for my army, because my army can do damage, and the hard part is if it does a lot of damage, they pick up a lot of models, but then they Inspiring Presence them to keep them around. This would be huge to kind of help remove that factor, so in that way, they're having to roll that dice, they're having to take that Battle Shock test, and they're having to have some models run away. Battle Shock, morale phase. Listen, they're the same thing, okay? You know what? No, you don't get to judge me, alright? I play both 40k and Age of Sigmar. Dang it, I'm learning, alright? What do I think? I think that this army is pretty great. I do love the Idoneth Deepkin. I really do hope they get some new models. I would love to see like a giant Kraken monster or a giant crab, or even just some like heavy infantry on foot, like some heavy infantry Namarti with like full breastplates and like just like that armor aesthetic. I think that'd be sick. I think it'd be awesome to see. Whether or not we'll get it, shrug, who knows? But that should be my brief summary there, and like I said, by the time this comes out, I will be getting ready to go to the Tampa Open. I will absolutely do a post-Tampa Open recap there, let you guys know how I did, how I got along, what I thought of the event. It's also my first GW event again. I am very excited. I'm actually super excited. I'm a giant dork, and I'm really excited for it. So it'll be a good time, but until next time, I'm Tattooed Tabletop. Go paint something.